In Attack on Titan, we see a moment in which Eren and Mikasa are facing off the traffickers that are attempting to kidnap Mikasa. Eren, as he finds himself in trouble, tells Mikasa to fight.
Who the hell do you think you are, you little brat? The only way to live is to fight!
Which is a theme obviously rampant throughout the entire show. However, I want to take a different approach to this theme. Me, being a Catholic Christian, want to impose a Catholic Christian worldview onto Attack on Titan, and in turn see what Attack on Titan can teach us about Catholic Christianity and the Bible. Bear with me as I need to make a multitude of connections before I can ascertain my main point in the end and how it pertains to the salvatory message Jesus gives us in the Gospels. To do that, we will have to start with the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is a short story towards the beginning of the book of Genesis in the Bible about the folly of misguided, prideful, and brash human ambition. It's also a lesson in spiritual physics that lay out the consequences of mankind trying to fight the divine hand of providence. In short, the story goes as follows. After the flood of Noah, God tells Noah and his sons to be fruitful and multiply to fill all the earth. Instead of doing that, they decide to settle in one place and build a tower that would reach the heavens so that they could make a name for themselves. The spiritual theme embedded in this is that when you have a multitude of people trying to build a tower to the heavens or a paradise on earth free from the influence of God, you cut yourself off from the source of truth, goodness, and beauty, which makes way for strife and conflict. As such, the story of Babel ends with the people of Babel abandoning the project altogether as the Spirit of God scatters their language, which is a way of saying that they talk past each other, never sought to understand each other, and also that when you have a big group of people with different languages, it's very hard to communicate effectively. And so why is this relevant to Attack on Titan? Well, it's because the world of Attack on Titan is a world without Jesus Christ. It's a world without spiritual endeavor. It is strictly humanistic and non-spiritual in just about every way. But I find it helpful in shining a light on the spiritual realities of the world we live in, because it shows just how ugly the world would be without spiritual and divine providence at play, and how grateful we can be for what we have here on earth, as far as just how beautiful life can be, both from a worldly perspective and a spiritual one. Nonetheless, what is the connection between Attack on Titan, and how does Eren Jaeger relate to Jesus Christ? I will explain the first question first, and the Jesus-Eren connection I will explain later. So for now, bear with me. In Attack on Titan, humanity builds massive walls to protect itself from the Titans, symbolizing both a desire for safety and their defiance against their perceived natural limits, the walls holding them back from freedom. Similarly, the Tower of Babel represents humanity's ambition to make a name for ourselves by building a tower that reaches the heavens, or build heaven on earth. What I am trying to say is that the people of Babel wanted freedom, but they wanted it at the exclusion of God, our source of truth, goodness, and beauty. In parallel to that, Marley and Eldia also want freedom, but at the exclusion of the other side, as we see throughout the show, and this naturally leads to conflict. You see, if they had just followed God's command to be fruitful and multiply as stated in Genesis 9, they would have achieved the very flourishing and glory they sought after in trying to build the Tower of Babel. In both stories, the Tower of Babel and Attack on Titan, human beings are united in an effort to establish control and power independent of God. Catholic Christian theology teaches that the prideful ambition leading to the separation from God's will, as seen in the sin of Babel, humanity's focus on self-reliance and defiance rather than dependence on God, our source of truth, goodness, and beauty, mirrored the sinful pride of those who sought to build the tower. This same capacity for pride we can see in many of the characters throughout Attack on Titans, from Zeke's self-imposed mission to peacefully castrate the people on the island, to Gabby's pride leading to actions and behaviors that hurt so many innocent people, including those she cared about. We see the same capacity of pride in trying to be right throughout the Tower of Babel narrative. People wanting to be right fail because nobody knows the right thing to do when it's up to us to define it. In other words, the lesson of Attack on Titan and the Tower of Babel shows us and teaches us the emptiness of freedom at the exclusion of virtue. Because like the people of Babel, they reject that a source of right and wrong exists, that a source of truth, goodness, and beauty exists. And when you reject that, you make way for utter tyranny, confusion, and destruction, as we see in Attack on Titan. After the sin of Babel, God confuses the language of the people, causing division, scattering them across the earth. This is a direct result of their prideful unity to exclude God. In Attack on Titan, division is a central theme, as different factions, races, and ideologies clash, leading to a conflict of epic proportions. The conflict between the Eldians and the Marleyans is rooted in historical sin, much like the division at Babel was a consequence of human arrogance. Christian teaching on original sin states that the consequences of sin reflect how sin introduces division not only between humanity and God, but also among human communities. This mirrors the scattered nations after Babel and the fractured societies in Attack on Titan. The Marleyans and Eldians, despite their violent history, as we see them in their time period, they really have no reason to hate each other. Now, let me clarify something. What I mean by they have no reason to hate each other isn't to diminish the fact that, yes, it was in fact Marley that was sending the Titans to the people on Paradis Island. What I'm really trying to say is the reason they shouldn't be angry and shouldn't hate each other is because after hundreds of years of history, despite the fact that the Eldians were the first oppressors, so to speak, at this point in their history, there should be some form of reconciliation, but in fact we have the opposite. It's like today, when we try and atone for the sins of our ancestors in some capacity by holding accountable the people of today in reparation for the sins of their ancestors as a means of finding some kind of revenge or reconciliation, but it's not going to work because the method by which they're doing it isn't a method that is conducive to the flourishing of human virtue and relationship building, which is what is needed if there's ever going to be proper freedom and proper peace. Their definition of freedom on both sides is precisely freedom at the exclusion of the other group, which is why there's always going to be conflict. And so unless both sides can essentially get over themselves, there will be no means for reparation, forgiveness, or reconciliation between Marley and the people of Paradis. Yes, their justification is logically and emotionally understandable, but the reality is that the Marleyans are only angry because they want to continue to be angry. We can actually see this quite clearly in our world today. To be angry for something that happened centuries and even decades ago is a mix of pride, wrath, envy, and a multitude of other vices which require intentional effort to maintain in the soul, which does more damage than good. No amount of atonement of people now is going to make up what happened in the past. Nonetheless, despite the divisions caused by Babel, God's ultimate plan is to reunite humanity through Christ. As seen in the Catholic Christian understanding of salvation history, at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, the Spirit of love that brings man and God together, enabled the apostles to speak in different tongues, undoing the effects of Babel and the creation of a new and united people in God. Pentecost is essentially the reversal or the anti-Babel, in which people can unify under a spiritual entity that is our source of truth, goodness, and beauty. Oddly enough, if you are intellectually honest, the only thing that will unite the world in a manner that transcends nation, race, class, and creed is a spiritual and transcendent cause, which is only found in Jesus, for only Jesus makes a claim to be the way, the truth, and the life. Nonetheless, that's for another video. In Attack on Titan, characters such as Eren Jaeger initially seek unity through destruction and domination. But the deeper theme of reconciliation emerges as various factions begin to realize that lasting peace can only come through understanding and cooperation. However, in Attack on Titan, we see that this is going to be futile, because the cycle of violence of human history is always doomed to repeat itself. Unlike the world we live in, Attack on Titan doesn't have a Pentecost or a Messiah to rally behind that doesn't embody exactly what Eren Jaeger imposes in the last season of Attack on Titan. The only way people can unite in the show is through an impulsive reactionary effort to simply survive, because a maniac like Eren decides to destroy most of humanity for the sake of its survival and the survival of his own people. Catholic theology teaches us that true unity and peace come not through human ambition or force, but through the submission of God's will, which ultimately reunites humanity in love and truth, as is the Church's mission of spreading the Gospels to all nations. The incompleteness of this in Attack on Titan is that its source of unity is an abstract concept of cooperation and a primal desire for survival, both of which are dictated only by circumstance, whereas the completeness of Christian unity is concretely rooted in a historical person, Jesus Christ. So, if we are to unite as people on earth for a cause and a Messiah, it would have to be Jesus. Unlike Allah or a Hindu deity, Jesus isn't too abstract or distant. He is historical. And unlike Buddha or another abstract major religion, Jesus claims to be God in the flesh and the true king of the whole world. On the contrary, Eren Jaeger is a pseudo-king and an anti-messiah, or to play on words, an archetype of an antichrist. Eren Jaeger not having a Jesus Christ is an example of someone who basically saw an opportunity for ultimate power and ran with it. In his own words, he is a garden variety idiot who got his hands on power. But just because someone has power doesn't mean that they should just destroy the world. Why on earth would you do that? We all like to think that we wouldn't do what Eren Jaeger did. But in reality, we are a lot closer to that than we might think. I'll give a few examples. I'm a huge fan of the game of Minecraft, and as much as I enjoy the creativity of world building, there are moments in which all I do is go into creative mode and destroy everything in TNT just to see what it looks like. Does that sound familiar? In the game GTA 5, when a player has all the weapons, money, and prestige that they need to complete the game, or after they complete it, the first thing they often do is to create as much havoc in the world as possible. We see examples of this sort of impulse to violence and hedonism in people all across the world. Professional athletes, high-level politicians and government officials or rich businessmen, when they have a certain level of influence, power, or money, they tend to indulge in their lust, hedonism, or sadism to some capacity. The reality is that we are all more like Eren Jaeger than we may want to admit. If you or I were to have all the power in the world, what's not to say we would do exactly what Eren Jaeger would do? Our natural inclination would be to see what we can do with the power we have out of curiosity. In Eren's own words, he simply wanted to see the scene that he creates, which is a scene of freedom at its worst, barren, empty, and sad. In the Tower of Babel, there is a figure named Nimrod, who is the great-grandson of Noah. In Christian tradition, Nimrod is the leader in charge of the project at Babel, and according to the Jewish scholar Josephus, Nimrod excited his people to have an affront and contempt for God. kind of like we see today in our culture. Josephus continues. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod, and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. They built the tower, neither sparing pain or any degree negligent in the works, and by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect, but the thickness of it was so great and so strongly built, that thereby its great height seemed upon the view to be less than it really was. In other words, their great project to defy God came out to be less than what it was, barren, empty, and sad. Now, as it pertains to Eren Jaeger, before I make him out to be an antichrist, I'm going to compare him to Nimrod. Eren's transformation throughout Attack on Titan is driven by a desire for freedom, which ultimately leads him to seek absolute control over the world. His ultimate plan, the Rumbling, is a massive demonstration of power meant to reshape the world by force. Nimrod, traditionally identified as the leader behind the construction of the Tower of Babel, is also driven by ambition. His goal is to build a tower that reaches the heavens, symbolizing humanity's attempt to seize control of their destiny and rival God's authority. Nimrod, often linked with powerful kings in history, is remembered as a mighty hunter and conqueror. His ambition led him to unite people and establish great cities, exercising control over vast territories, much like Eren's desire to dominate and protect his people through extreme measures. Eren is known for rebelling against the established order, including both Marleyan oppressors and even his own people. His actions reflect a deeper rebellion against the perceived limits of human freedom, choosing to defy both political systems and the natural order. The Tower of Babel is traditionally seen as a symbol of human rebellion against God. By building the tower, Nimrod and his people attempted to defy divine providence, seeking to establish their own independence and glory for their own sake. In broader mythos, Nimrod's reputation as a rebellious figure can be linked to rulers who challenged existing powers or religious structures, striving to impose their own authority onto people, much as Eren seeks to overthrow the powers of the world so that he can impose his ideas onto them. Eren's quest for freedom leads to the catastrophic consequences we see at the end of Season 4, because his justice is free and excluded from virtue. Nimrod, like Eren, such figures achieve great things but often leave behind a trail of destruction and societal collapse. And so, Nimrod and Eren Jaeger are both examples of what human ambition stripped from virtue can do to people. Virtue, which comes from God, our source of truth, goodness, and beauty, whether you want to admit it or not. The world of Attack on Titan doesn't have that source. It relies on human entities to divine these things, and due to the flawed natures of these entities, they will eventually lead again to the very problems we see preluded to at the end of Attack on Titan. The people of Attack on Titan will never experience unity that transcends mankind because the people there do not have a Jesus Christ. They have an Eren Jaeger, a lot of them. And for whatever reason, human nature inclines that it's always figures like Eren that ascertain the most power. In our world, we are lucky. We have a Christ, a Messiah called Jesus. The only hope for mankind in this world to unify is through him, and against the forces of evil that seek the destruction of the world and mankind. Christianity posits unity in a way that's both abstract and tangible. It's abstract in that it's at least spiritual, not just the set of concepts that arise out of necessity and circumstance, the way we see it happen in Attack on Titan. It is tangible in that Jesus Christ, the eternal logic of the universe, is a historical figure not an abstract one. Eren Jaeger in Attack on Titan tried to be that, and that's why in the end it failed, because humanity in Attack on Titan doesn't have a complete Messiah, like Jesus, who builds us an ark through his church. These connections highlight the parallel themes of human pride, division, and the hope of reconciliation through divine intervention. The divine intervention in Attack on Titans, though, was always from the source of a fallen individual. When we encounter the divine providence of a godlike figure, Ymir, who is like us, fallen, whenever she plays God, mankind suffers in the same way that when Eren plays God, mankind also suffers. But when we let God play God, our source of truth, goodness, and beauty, and follow in genuine submission of his will, we don't have to worry about letting our ambitions, vices, and sin play into our destruction. If mankind didn't have a Messiah like Jesus Christ, we would naturally have an Antichrist like Eren Jaeger. Eren Jaeger is the natural result of a world without spirituality and divine providence. Yet, we see in that world, mankind maintains its own fallen nature of sin. As such, if Attack on Titan were ever our world, the most moral thing a person could do would to in fact be the person who voluntarily is the big bad force of evil that forces divided people to unite just to save the world from its own destruction. We are lucky that we don't have that world. We have a Christ that transcends race, class, and creed to bring us together in virtue rather than in vice. Eren Jaeger brings the barrenness of the Tower of Babel to mankind, which is what we are all inclined to do. Christ is the one who says not to build a tower to the heavens, but to build an ark that carries us from our troubles into the promised land, into the new heavens and the new earth. And this brings us back to the beginning of the video. In the show, we see a moment in which Eren and Mikasa are facing off the traffickers. As Eren finds himself in trouble, Eren tells Mikasa to fight.
Who the hell do you think you are, you little brat? The only way to live is to fight!
Oddly enough, in the Bible, Jesus says the same thing, but in a different manner. Jesus says to fight, but that fight will be within the soul. In the Gospels, he repeatedly says, deny yourself, bear your cross, and follow him. Well, what does that mean? Well, for one thing, it means, when he said deny yourself, to fight the inclination to sin, whether it be pride, envy, wrath, greed, gluttony, sloth, or lust. When he says bear your cross, he's trying to say carry the weight of responsibility that's demanded of you. And follow him means incline your will to the will of our source of truth, goodness, and beauty. This theme of fighting is also rampant in the New Testament, with the Apostle Paul, who says in his letter to the Ephesians, we are not fighting flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, cosmic powers of darkness, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. Paul also asks us to take up the armor of light, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace, the helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, and the sword of the Spirit, indicating that our efforts to fight the good fight against the forces of evil will in fact be a fight, and it will be a difficult one. And so while Eren Jaeger may call us to fight for the sake of survival, Jesus Christ calls us to fight against the forces of evil that seek the ruin of souls and mankind. Jesus calls us not to fight for circumstantial survival, but to fight in virtue, for the promised land of truth, goodness, and beauty, free from the influences of spiritual sicknesses that encourage the behaviors of those who would seek to do more harm than good. With that being said, God bless, and get out there and make better happen daily.